There we go. We're live. Hi everyone. Happy to introduce you to our Bloody Scotland prize winners panel. Chris, do you want to start us off with an intro to you and your books?
Yeah, well, I'm the author of 29 books now. I keep going to say 30 because we've finished the 30th. That's including the books that I write with my wife under the name Ambrose Parry. Mostly been crime fiction, some science fiction, and quite a bit of historical fiction now. And my latest book is The Cracked Mirror, which is why I'm on, because it won the Michael Varry Prize a couple of weeks ago. And it's probably one of the books I'm proudest of. It's certainly one of the books that took the most work. And it's the elevator pitches is a book about what would happen if someone like Miss Marple had to team up with someone like Harry Bosch. So it's kind of a love letter to the whole genre, but showcasing both extremes of the crime fiction spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, how does that merge together? Like a kind of, I was reading that in the description before we went live, that it was like described as like Agatha Christie meets Michael Connelly, which, how do you make that work? That seems like two very polar opposites to bring together.
Yeah, that's the whole challenge, really, is coming up with a story that allows those two things to exist in the same book. And it might be quite weird for the reader initially. The first three chapters are all from the point of view of Penny Coyne, and they're all called The Corpse and the Confessional, chapters 1, 2, and 3. And then you might think there's been a binding error because suddenly you're reading a book called Everybody Dies Alone, and it's set in Los Angeles. And it's so Penny Coyne is my kind of cozy pseudo Miss Marple character. She's in her 80s. She lives in a lovely little village in Perthshire where everything's very picture postcard, very genteel, very gentrified, but nonetheless there's a lot of murders there, all of which she solves. And but she's about to start. She's looking at another murder just when the book starts. Someone's been found dead in the confessional of her local church. But shortly after that, she gets an invitation to a wedding. But she's slightly perturbed because she doesn't recognise the name of the bride or the groom, and so she doesn't know why she's been invited. But she's slightly worried because in her 80s she's starting to lose her memory, and she wonders if she's just forgotten the names of the people, and that's kind of concerning for her. But she's going to go to a wedding. Who isn't? You know, she likes the hotel that it's happening in, so she goes to this wedding. And meanwhile, at the other end of the spectrum, we've got my character Johnny Hawk, who is your kind of classic hard-boiled, as much a hard-boiled detective as also a kind of 80s and 90s action hero. You know, he owes a lot to 80s and 90s action cinema, and things like everything from Raymond Chandler through to Michael Connelly. So he's your classic maverick, the guy who's always in trouble with his captain. He's an LAPD homicide detective. And he gets asked to look into an apparent suicide at a movie studio. And he's asked, because the head of the studio is very well connected, he's told, look into this thoroughly, professionally, but discreetly. And Johnny manages 2 out of 3. He's quite thorough, and he's convinced it's not a suicide. That ruffles a lot of feathers. He gets suspended, and he's determined to keep looking into this case, and he's got one lead when he's on suspension, and the lead is an invitation to a wedding in Perthshire in Scotland. So he has to go to Scotland, and that's where obviously you get 2 classic detectives, 2 very accomplished detectives at a wedding. Of course, someone else is going to die. So the 2 of them end up, well, first of all, they both suspect that each other has got something to do with the next death. So they're kind of at loggerheads from the off, but eventually they realise that they're going to have to work together. So it's about taking all the things that we love about the cozy and all the things we love about the hard-boiled and seeing them all anew, as if for the first time, because you're seeing the world of the Cozy from Johnny Hawk's perspective, and you're seeing the world of the Hardboiled from Penny Coyne's perspective, and to them it's a whole new world. So you'll see things hopefully in a different light. It means I get to take all the fun stuff, all the conventions, the tropes, the cliches, but make them fresh or make them part of the story.
And I'd imagine there's nothing quite as fearsome as coming up across a Scottish granny.
Yeah. Let's say she's not a granny. Part of it is that she's someone like Miss Marple. She's never really settled down. She's got family. She's got a nephew, but she's quite fearsome. Yeah, she's fearsome in her own quiet way. She's very polite, and she's all about the rules. You know, I read a lot of Miss Marple books, and also I read the book called 12, which is a book of 12 short stories by 12 women, all women crime writers, all writing about Miss Marple. And I read all those because I was looking for something that isn't in Agatha Christie, and it wasn't in 12 either, and that is who is Miss Marple. You know, we all know what she looks like, we know what she does, but we don't know who she is. We don't know what makes her tick. It's as if she was just born in her 80s in St Mary Mead, and I like to know what makes a character think the way they think. You know, what allows her to see the tiny details that will help her solve a murder. So with Penny, I wanted to have a character who you start to understand why she is a great detective and what makes her view the world how she does. And part of it is she really thinks you have to stick to the rules. And if people break the rules, she can trace the damage, you know, all the way back to whoever's the murderer. But that's contrasted by the fact that Johnny is one of these guys who's all about the law, but the rules not so much, because he thinks the rules are often there to protect the rich and powerful from the law. So he's breaking rules all over the place. So the two of them are obviously going to be at loggerheads because they've got such a different philosophy. But in classic mismatched detective style, they both have to learn from each other and be a bit more like each other as the story goes on.
It must have been so much fun. It sounds fun to write.
It was fun, massive fun to write on a daily basis. You know, and once I knew what was going on with these characters, I could have such a blast having them kind of annoy each other or argue with each other, and it was a great fun on a day-to-day basis. On a macro level, it was the hardest book I've ever written because of having to write not just two different characters' points of view, but writing two completely different literary styles, as if these were separate novels. It was, and it's quite a complex plot. If you're going to have two brilliant detectives, you need to have a mystery that's worthy of their abilities. So it had to be one of the most complex things I've ever written. So it was exhausting. I think it was the hardest book I've ever written, but in many ways it was one of the most enjoyable. I mean, it was great fun to write, and also it's very playful in its tone. It's a fun book. It's I would get people saying to me that they liked my books more back when I was writing more kind of comic novels, and it's probably closer in tone to the type of book I was writing 20 years ago, but it's taken 20 odd years of experience to attempt a book as complicated as this. I mean, say complicated, it's all the complication was at my end so that it doesn't feel complicated to read.
But then, do you think the sort of experience of writing in the other genres and things has helped as well? So you've written like historical stuff and sci-fi and things. Does that help you weave those more complex ideas together?
So completely. I think just the more you write, the more you're learning. You're always kind of building new muscles as a writer if you're trying different things. But I say the biggest change and the biggest help was writing the Ambrose Parry books with my wife, Marissa Hatesman. Because of writing together, I had to change the way I write. I had to change I used to obviously just keep it all in my own head, but when you're writing together, it has to be exclusively and explicitly planned out. It has to be. We have a whiteboard. We have 5-act structure. We know what all the chapters roughly are going to be, so that I can write one where Marissa's writing another. and that level of planning was crucial to the Cracked Mirror. I couldn't have taken on a book like this, and I wouldn't have even tried if it wasn't I knew I had Marissa to kind of bounce things off, and she helped me work out the structure. I mean, structurally, is really, really complicated. Beneath the surface, I mean, it's a classic 5-act structure. Above the surface, it's just that working with her really helped me take on something as ambitious as this.
So I like what you were saying about researching it as well by reading all the different things. Was the book you read of the short stories the ones that Ellie Griffiths and people had written?
Yeah. I mean, I'd read lots of Miss Marple. I mean, I'm sure we all have. And but I suppose that the fun was just taking not just Miss Marple, taking everything that we love about the cozy genre and its different iterations, and then everything that we love about the more hard-boiled end of the genre, and just taking all of those, all the things that we expect to see in there. So I guess it's like decades of reading experience that I've poured into this as well. But I suppose I like things that play around with the conventions. I mean, I'm a big fan of, for instance, I like horror movies, but my favourite horror movie is probably The Cabin in the Woods, because it's something that just kind of deconstructs what we like about horror films, but it doesn't forget to give you a really good horror film. I think that I'm always wary of when someone's doing something that's deconstructing a genre or something that sounds very highfalutin. They sometimes come across as if they think they're above the genre, or it can be quite snooty. I had to make this a love letter to the genre, so I like stuff that will, like The Cabin in the Woods is clearly made by people who love horror movies, and so I'm sort of want to take all the things I love about the genre and put it on the page in a fresh new way.
Is that what drew you into writing things like sci-fi as well? Do you like the sci-fi genre to read?
Yeah. I mean, I'll read quite a lot of science fiction, and kind of all genres, really. And I guess when I was growing up, I was reading a lot of science fiction, and my I guess one of my great influences and great inspirations was the late Ian Banks, who I was fortunate enough to get to know, and the fact that Ian was able to write his own dark, very strange, very funny novels, but also write science fiction as Ian M. Banks, and just have these two completely tandem, complementary strands of his writing. And that told me I can do that. It's okay to do anything, really. You don't need to just stick to one particular field.
You ever attempt to merge kind of a love of horror into crime, or?
Well, I've kind of done that with. I wrote a book called Pandemonium back in 2009, and that was just a horror novel. Really, it was about a bunch of teenagers on a kind of school retreat. There's been a school tragedy, and they're all taken away to the Scottish Highlands to one of these kind of outdoor activity centres to kind of get away and discuss their feelings about it all. And of course, they all want to get drunk and get off with each other, but the place gets attacked by demons because it's above a top secret underground military installation that's opened a portal to this other dimension. And so that was great fun, because I grew up on all the kind of 80s horror movies, what were known as the video nasties. I absolutely loved all those slasher movies. So Pandemonium was me playing with all the tropes and conventions of the horror genre, and an element of the high school genre, because to me it was like a cross between The Breakfast Club and Friday the 13th, and with aliens thrown in. So just lots and lots of horror. There's been an ongoing attempt to get a film made of it, which is almost shot a few times. Keeps getting really close to production, and then something just doesn't quite come off. But the script for it's fantastic, and except that when I first read the script, I hadn't read the book in about a decade, and I read the script and I was absolutely horrified. I thought, I didn't write anything quite as horrible as this. This is really, really scary, really nasty. Then I went back and looked at my book and thought, oh, actually, I did write all of these horrible things. But it's a genre I like kind of blending. I mean, I wrote a book called The Cut, came out in 2021, and that's also kind of about horror. It's about a woman called Millicent Spark, who's in her 70s, and she's just been released from prison after 25 years for murder. And but before she was jailed, she was a special effects makeup artist, working on really, really nasty horror movies in the 80s and early 90s. And it was kind of all about the golden age of exploitation cinema, and about the kind of controversies over horror movies back in the 80s and 90s, how the government brought in legislation and prosecuted people for selling and renting certain movies. So it was another opportunity for me to just write at length about what I love about horror, because horror obviously blends with crime fiction quite comfortably. You know, it doesn't need to be supernatural horror, although that blends quite well too. And in fact, probably one of the best books of this year is Blood Like Mine by Stuart Neville, which is a sort of horror crime crossover par excellence.
I'll have to keep an eye out for that. I like the merge of horror and crime. And crime. Love both of those mixing.
Oh, Blood Like Mine is absolutely stunning. It's for anyone out there who's also interested, it's about a woman who's been on the run with her teenage daughter across the US for a long time. I think her name is Rebecca and her daughter's called Moonflower. And it's crucial. They've been on the run for ages. And an FBI agent has started to track a series of murders. All these guys who've been found with their spinal cord severed and drained of blood. But he then finds out they were all online groomers. They're all kind of online paedophiles. And he starts to put this together. And really what it comes down to is that Rebecca is trying to keep her daughter safe because her daughter has certain dietary requirements. And Stuart doesn't actually use the V word, but clearly that's what's going on. And it's a brilliant meditation on how far a mother would go to keep her child safe, even if her child is effectively a monster. It's a brilliant book. It's absolutely breathtaking.
Wow, sounds fascinating. So going back to the awards, because we don't have you for much longer. How does it? Because you're not unfamiliar to being on the McIlvenney list.
Sorry, what did you say?
I said it's not an unfamiliar place for you being on the McIlvenney list, is it, or being on an awards shortlist. You've won quite a few. Is it still a big thrill winning a?
Absolutely, I think it even more so. I felt very, very emotional when it was read out at the ceremony, and probably all the more because I won the McIlvenney Prize in 2016, and this was the 5th time that I've been shortlisted since. So when you don't win several times in a row, you really start to treasure the prospect of the moment when it is you. I think as Marissa and I had been shortlisted for the first 3 Ambrose Parry novels, and I'd also shortlisted for Places in Darkness, which is a science fiction crime crossover. But I was particularly happy because I think this might be my best book, certainly one of my best books, and I think it means more if it's a book that you really rate yourself and it's been recognised in that way. But I mean, obviously, it was a very strong shortlist. I mean, Val McDermid's new Karen Pirie book was on it, Past Lying, which is brilliant, a fantastic evocation of life under COVID. Quite uncomfortable because it's all the stuff that we're quite glad to have forgotten, but Val brought it back so viscerally. But also Abir Mukherjee's book Hunted is just a fantastic thriller, absolutely unputdownable, pacey thriller. So to get the nod ahead of those told me I must have written something pretty good.
It is, without a doubt. I say this offline as well, so it's probably one of my favorite short lists or prize lists. There's so many of my favorite books every year come from the McIlvenney and the debut list.
Yeah, there's a real, I think there's a real breadth and variety in Scottish crime fiction, and that's reflected in those lists, and it just keeps coming. I mean, there's a book that I imagine will be on the debut list and probably the McIlvanney Prize list next year, called 5 by 5 by Claire Wilson. And Claire's a prison intelligence officer. So it's a book drawing on her day job to write this prison crime drama like you've never read before, because it's so authentic and it's a side of it that you don't normally see. It's the fact that you realise the people who work in the prison are almost as much prisoners of the system as the prisoners themselves. So I'd look out for that one next year.
Liz, who's watching, says it's on her TBR list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really, really excellent.
You got a lot of people agreeing that writer in the thing. You can't see the comments, sorry. Is it hard then, if there is I mean, I agree as well, there is a massive breadth of Scottish crime writing that's amazing. Is it hard to stand out amongst that?
I don't know. I think as long as you've got something new to say and a new perspective, crime readers, as you know, are voracious. You know, they're reading so much, and so they're always on the lookout for something that tells a story in a new way, or that just tells you a story from a perspective you've not read before. So I think we don't want something that's so different that you're alienated by it. So I think as long as you've got a fresh voice, it will help you stand out. I mean, that's why something like 5 by 5 I think will do very well, because it's a side of the kind of crime milieu that we don't normally see depicted this way. But I guess it's that hook. You know, if there's something in the hook of a story that makes it stand out right away. So, like as I was describing Stuart Neville's book, you know, you hear what that's about, you think, God, I've got to read that. Or Abair's book, which, you know, this, even the tagline about that you might not be able to save your children, you know, but you might be able to stop them. It's you know, there's, I guess as we're all voracious readers, it doesn't take much to tempt us.
It doesn't know. I've read Abair's book. It's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah. It absolutely rattles along. I was sort of saying to him, I'd always grown up wanting to write that kind of airport thriller, you know, a big, beefy, fast-paced thriller like that, and he's really kind of managed to pull off one of my ambitions.
So is that something that might be coming up next for you, like a thriller type thing? Or
I don't know at the moment. What's next is Marissa and I have finished the 5th Ambrose Parry novel, which is called The Death of Shame, which will be out next summer. And after that, I'm writing my next solo book over the course of the next year, I guess. And I'm not really sure what it'll be about yet. It's too early in the process for me, but I'd quite like to write another Jack Parlebane book, and that would seem appropriate because whatever I write next will be coming out 2026, and that'll be 30 years since Quite Ugly One Morning, my first novel. So I'm hoping I've got a couple of the seeds of ideas for a new Parlebane book, so that's likely to be what I write next.
Does it take going to the Ambrose Parry novels? Does it take a long time to write those, just because they're so accurately researched and like spot on in the history?
They know that they're actually the last couple have been quicker to write than my solo books, because there's 2 of us doing it. That's, you know, that really helps. And also, Marissa spent about 3 years sort of compiling a huge body of research and knowledge, and you don't need to do that every time. You know, she's able to draw upon that and add to it, depending on what subject we're going into. But it means that we've already got this big sort of data bank of information and knowledge about that period. Although we're planning to move into a slightly different period for our next Ambrose Parry project, and that, so there will be maybe we might need a bit more lead time. I don't know, but yeah, we've got quite a depth now working together and dividing the tasks. So the great thing is, like, if I'm on the road or editing, or on one book, Marissa can be working on the Ambrose Parry at the same time. And we can literally be in two places at once. You know, sometimes we've been doing separate book festivals.
That must be quite tricky when you've got quite a publicity process for both things to manage.
It's only happened a couple of times where we've been kind of like split in terms of both books at the same time. Last summer, at one point, Marissa was appearing as Ambrose at the Isla Book Festival, and I was at the Agatha Christie Festival with the Fun-Loving Crime Writers. So we were able to divide our appearances on that occasion.
We've got a few minutes left before we swap you over to Alan. What is it like being on stage in Glastonbury with the Fun-Loving Crime Writers?
Oh, it's just the stuff of teenage fantasies. That said, it's also quite scary. This year it felt slightly scarier because on the day before, I just arrived at Bristol Airport and I got a text saying Val wasn't coming because she wasn't well, and so we had to kind of rejig the set, and I realised I'd have to sing certain songs, and also it just threw us all for a bit of a curve. And then just as we were starting the set, I remember when our drummer Doug Johnson started the intro to the first song, this feeling like, I can only compare it to when you're going to the top of the roller coaster and you know you can't get off, and realise this is going to be exciting, it's going to be scary, and I can't get off, so I might as well enjoy it. That is really what it was. It was an adrenaline rush, but it was a scary, and massively exciting experience.
And do you get to meet any other bands backstage, or?
There was a few of them around that we didn't really go and bother anybody, but we were sharing a dressing room area, and in fact, at one point sharing a fridge with Russell Crowe. Because Russell Crowe's band were on like 2 or 3 acts after us, and so we saw him up close, a few feet away, but we were all very well behaved and didn't go bothering them for selfies or anything.
You might have been just as in awe of all of you.
that happened the last time when we played Glastonbury. We were Stuart was supposed to try and get an autograph from Marty Pellow for his wife, but when he went up to Marty Pellow was awestruck by the fact that Val McDermid was there. So, yeah, he was fanboying over Val.
So we've got 2 minutes left before I swap you over. Do you want to remind people what they're going to go and buy after they've been listening?
Yeah, go buy The Cracked Mirror. It's Miss Marple versus Harry Bosch in probably one of the most head-melting, twisty-turny crime novels you're going to read in a long time.
And I'm going to sneak one more question in, because Liz Mystery has asked, what do you prefer, performing or writing?
I couldn't live without writing. The performing is the icing on the cake, but you've got to live off the cake.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're not very well, so I really appreciate you coming along.
It's been fun. Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, bye.
Yo.
Look at that. It seamlessly swapped us over. Almost. Hello, Alan.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you? We've had you on before. It's been a pleasure.
Yes.
Do you want to start us off the same way as Chris and tell us a little bit about yourself and your books?
Certainly. Well, I'm here to talk about this book, which is The Silent House of Sleep. It's a Dr. Jack Cuthbert mystery. And it's the main character in it is a Scottish doctor who works in London with Scotland Yard between the wars. And he is a complex man. He's in his early 30s. He's very tall. He's striking to look at. He's very good at his job. But like so many men of his generation at the time between the wars, he is suffering really from the consequences of his time in the First World War and in the trenches. And he's living with the medical consequences of that, what we would call now PTSD, but of course didn't have that name at the time. Moreover, he also lives with the very closely guarded secret of his homosexuality. And he's living at a time where he would be branded a criminal. And of course, he's so tightly closeted that really he hasn't even come to terms with it himself. As for the actual plot, the story begins in 1928, when a law student goes missing in London. Not one, but two bodies are uncovered in a shallow grave. And Jack Cuthbert is called in to look into this. He is a pathologist. He's what we would call these days a forensic pathologist, but at the time that term really didn't exist. But he's working with a new detective chief inspector at the Yard, one who he's keen to work with and keen to impress, who he initially isn't having a great relationship with. And he's really faced with an incredibly baffling problem with this, the discovery of these bodies and how they've been placed in the grave. I won't say too much in the terms of the detail as spoilers, but it turns out to be a very baffling forensic case for him. He has to just slowly unravel piece by piece. And of course, he's working at a time when science is really just having just beginning to have an impact on forensic medicine. Pathology really hadn't changed very much for the last 100 years before this, but between the wars, there are new innovations, there is new technology and new opportunities that are open to him. It's nothing like, of course, what we would have today. I mean, it's a long time before we're ever going to see DNA or even complex blood type analysis and things like that. But he has to use all the most modern things at the time to help him solve this. And he has to try and identify the people, help identify the killer. It's not so much probably a whodunit, this book. It's more of a whydunit, because that's really the main puzzle in the whole thing, why it's been done the way it has been done. But the crux of all is that in solving the case, Cuthbert actually realizes that he uncovers quite a nightmarish secret from his own past and realizes that he's brought rather more than just bad memories back from the war.
Oh dear. That sounds interesting. So setting it up for future books in the series as well.
Well, very much so. I mean, there's already some others in the series out. I had written several of them because I really was very keen. Once I'd finished the first one, I was very keen to say some more about this character and the cast of characters in the book. And I thought there's more cases, there's more development, more character development that I want to see. And so I've written some other ones, and there's a second, a third, and there's soon to be just about a fourth one out as well. So plenty of meat for people to chew on.
There is indeed. I'm curious when you said he was very tall. How tall are we talking about here? Are we going for a Jack Reacher-esque tall?
Well, he's about 6'5", 6'6", which is extraordinarily tall for 1928, and he's always the tallest person in every room, and it's the thing that people remember about him. Apart from one other feature about him, which I won't mention, he has a bit of an obsessive compulsive disorder about his shoes. That he's always got very, very shiny shoes. But the reasons for that people will find out if they actually read the book. But so I wanted to make him really quite unusually striking, just to separate him in some way from everyone around him, because in a way he is a Scotsman working in London. He's a gay man who is so closeted that he can't share that with really anybody. He's very isolated in many ways, and I wanted to sort of, the metaphor for that is that he's standing out in every crowd. But the thing about him is that, like, he has no idea really of his own worth and his own attractiveness to people around him.
I mean, even not in the 20s, it's quite unusual to be that tall.
Yes, exactly. You do meet them now and again, more than you, but no one has ever met anybody as tall as this guy at that time.
Fiona has said she likes medics writing crime.
That's
the next
great.
time we should have Marissa from Ambrose Parry with you.
Well, I mean, there's a few of us around getting busy writing. There's a lot of, I mean, there's a long history of doctors turning to writing and writing fiction or drama, and I think as a doctor, you spend a lot of time with people and delving into people's psyches and people trying to understand motivations as well as understanding the body. You're trying to understand the mind, so you end up after not very long with quite a lot of material that you can talk about and populate your books with.
I think scientists writing crime is a really interesting thing in general. To be fair, we talked about this at a panel, didn't we?
Exactly. It was a very good one, and I think for me it was very important that the medical and forensic detail were as authentic as I could possibly make them. And one of the challenges, of course, with that was that I was dealing with a historical time period. So I had to spend quite a lot of time trying to make sure that nothing was anachronistic at all, that I allowed him I gave him the techniques he would have had at the time and so on. So it meant reading the textbooks that he had read in his training, so things that were written in the 1920s, so that I was aware of both the terminology he was using and the limits of his knowledge at the time of what he could. Because as soon as you throw something in that is blatantly anachronistic, it might not be obvious to many people who are reading it, but there's always going to be somebody who will send you the letter. I think you'll find, that was not the case in 1928 or 29. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to jar my readers by taking them out of the story. I wanted it to be as authentic and sounding and feeling as possible.
But I think there's a joy when you get something like the Ambrose Parry novels with Marissa, or these ones that you've written, of knowing that someone knows what they're talking about when you're reading them. You know you're going to be in safe hands.
I hope so, because I think you want to lose yourself in the story and the emotional roller coaster of it without having to wonder, is that right? Is that true? Is that right? And of course, for me, not only the medical stuff had to be right, but obviously the historical period had to be right as well. So I had to spend quite a lot of time making sure that was spot on and accurate as well, particularly the scenes that there are many scenes that are set in the First World War, and I wanted to make sure that was absolutely as authentic as possible.
Liz says that she loves these sort of stories are now being told. It's important to see representation of LGBT people throughout the ages.
Absolutely, and it was a very different world for the LGBT community. I mean, it's not completely perfect now, but in the 1920s, it was probably closer to a nightmare. As I said, his reaction to it is one that was maybe not that uncommon, particularly in his kind of professional grouping. I mean, if he had come out in any way, he would certainly have lost his job, lost his status. He would have probably been put in jail and criminalised and so on. So it would have had a devastating impact on him. And he knows that, and he knows that he just has to hold it all in.
Fiona says, have publishers been lining up since you won the debut?
Well, the reason she's asking that is because this is a self-published book. I think it's the first self-published book that has won one of these prizes. The reason it's proudly self-published, but it's self-published because no one wanted it. There's a lot of people this was sent to over a period of several years, but I mean, I'm not a chicken, and I think Chris was talking about his 30-year writing career. I don't have 30 years left in me as a writing career, so I felt I had to get on with it. If I wanted these out, I had to put them out. The simple answer is no, not really. They haven't really been queuing up yet, but someone told me just after the award, said, well, the reason they won't be queuing up is that no one will believe that it was actually self-published, because how could you do that and then win a prize like this? Maybe we should tell them now it is self-published, and I would be interested in looking at possible developments in that line, because publishing has been great fun, and I've really enjoyed it, and it has allowed the book to get into the hands of many people. But you do reach a limit to what you can do without an infrastructure of a traditional publishing house in terms of things like distribution and getting things into bookshops and so on. It becomes a huge challenge, almost insurmountable. So yeah, so if I want to get greater reach for these stories and for more people to be able to share Jack's stories, then I probably have to go down that route.
I think it's a testament to how far and wide the Bloody Scotland judges read as well, though, because it's not the first. You're the first winner, maybe, who's self-published. It's not the first self-published book.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
On the list.
Yeah, and I genuinely was very surprised to be shortlisted. To be honest, I thought that I knew it was open to self-published books, but I really didn't think one would actually make it onto the shortlist, let alone win it. And so I was very surprised to be awarded the thing. Very grateful, but very surprised, especially when you look at the other books that were on the shortlist. I mean, there was a remarkable set of books on that shortlist. I think you were saying yourself earlier on about how high quality the McIlvenney and the debut shortlists are at Bloody Scotland. And I was in very good company.
Every year, hands down, I love them. The shortlist, I get really excited when they're announced, because at least every year, one or two of the books will be on my top 10 books of the year, if not my favourite read of the year.
Absolutely.
Like always, since we've got involved with interviewing the people on the list, it's, the quality blows. I don't even know how they pick a winner.
No, I mean, I read them, and all the ones in the debut one, and I had selected my winner, and it wasn't me. but it's so I was very grateful that they chose it, and they were all quite different, the books on the shortlist. So it would have been it comes down to personal taste on the day, I'm sure. But I was very grateful to the judges for picking it.
How does it feel, though? How did it feel when your name was announced to be the winner, especially to be the first self-published winner? That's a really big.
Yeah, I know everyone says this. Oh, I was stunned. I was genuinely speechless. Because I had so much convinced myself about who I thought would win, and I was standing beside them and about to push them onto the stage. And we've all become quite good friends, the shortlisted group, because we've done a number of things together, and there is, I think we feel that we're following the same, we're kind of fellow travelers on a journey. We're not the same age. I'm the oldest of all of them, obviously. I could be their father, a lot of them, but we're kind of at the same stage of having a debut novel out there, and there's a lot of sharing of ideas and sharing of experiences and whatever. So it was I was in a way out, and I think I said on the stage, or maybe I didn't, I meant to, that I really felt that it would have been nice if we could all have won, because it was just, they were all so different and so good, and I felt for the judges that they had to pick one, but it was lovely that they picked me, and I was very pleased and very grateful.
Liz says she understands what you mean about age being a factor. She was 52 when she got published, and is a hybrid author now. It's never easy.
Yeah.
And Fiona says she's dying to know who your winner was.
Well, she'll have to she'll have to still wonder, because I'm not going to tell her.
Oh, harsh.
So no, but they were all good. I mean, and I'm sure I spoke to quite a lot of people during Bloody Scotland, and quite a lot of people would, they loved. A lot of people loved Daniel's book. A lot of people loved Martin's book. A lot of people loved Susie's book. A lot of people loved Doug's book. Everybody had their winner. So I think it was just testament to the breadth of them. They were all very different books, but all equally good.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, I'm working my way through the lists as we speak, and I'm never sure that I can pick the winner.
Yeah, exactly. It's most people say
my favourite, but I don't know.
Yeah. And you would possibly have a different favourite at different times, depending on the mood you were in, sort of thing, and what kind of, if you wanted a historical thing, or you wanted something set in a, something gothic or something, whatever. There was something there for all readers, I thought.
Well, I think historical crime is getting to be quite a big thing now again, isn't it? I don't know that it was that popular for a while, and there's some really cracking historical crime series out there now, yours included.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, for me, the historical aspect of it was one of the real pleasures in writing it, because I really loved getting away from the present day, to be honest, because finding the present day is a bit stressful, and I like to go back in time to a different world, not a better world necessarily, but a different world, a world with different challenges and different expectations, but people are still the same, and that's the thing. And I mean, the truth of the matter is that when I set out to write this book, I didn't really set out to write a crime novel. I wanted to write a novel about a character, a complex character. I wanted to make him a pathologist, because that's my own background. I wanted to write about what I knew. And I wanted to challenge this character and see how he changed and developed. And of course, being a pathologist, inevitably that ended up with bodies and slabs and crimes and whatever. So it became a crime novel. But I'm still probably more interested in this character's development and the people around him and how he affects the people around him. He has an assistant he works with, a very young pathologist who is slowly developing over the series and growing and changing. He has this detective chief inspector who he's had a very difficult relationship with at the beginning, but is slowly warming to him, and they both come to a realization that they can really work together very well. There's his housekeeper, who's a very unconventional housekeeper. She's not the Mrs. Hudson from Sherlock Holmes or anything like that. She's not the sort of dowager woman. She's a very young, glamorous Belgian refugee who occupies his house, that raises lots of eyebrows why this man is living with this beautiful young woman. And then there's, of course, the trusty sergeant who works with the chief inspector, who's a very different kettle of fish again, but he has his own stories as well. And all the characters, I hope, none of them are black and white, none of them are cliched. I'm trying to make them as three-dimensional as possible, that people, and hopefully people can get very much invested in them. And certainly the feedback I'm getting is that people are interested in the characters. They might have favourites, but a lot of people want to know more about Jack Cuthbert and what's going to happen to him and how it's going to develop.
Well, I do, just from this talk.
Good.
I think that's one of the big things, though, isn't it, of any kind of fiction, unless you're really interested in the characters.
Yeah,
you don't the story.
Yeah, I mean, we all read lots of books, and I personally find it very hard to read books where I don't like anybody in it. You know, there's got to be somebody that I can root for, and they may be flawed, they may have challenges, may have whatever, but I think I've got to fundamentally want to spend time with them, because when you're reading a book, you're spending time with characters, and the same is true when you're writing one. You're spending a lot of time with these people, and I didn't want to create a group of people who I just didn't want to spend time with, because you're in their minds, they're in your mind, they're talking to you, they're sharing their thoughts with you, and I wanted to spend time with people that I would want to, and I wanted to spend time with Jack Cuthbert. I wanted to spend time with the two police officers and the others in the book, the small cast.
Have you got in mind an arc for the story? Do you know where it's going to go? How many books you're going to write?
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly how many books I'll write. I suppose that will depend quite a lot on what sort of appetite people have. But I do know what the last page of the last book is. I know where it ends, and I know what's going to happen, and I know the outline of the very last case that we'll be looking at. There's the beauty of moving forward in real time, because the first book starts in 1928 to 1929 roughly. The next book is following on from that, so it's roughly about 6 to 12 months each book. So we're going slowly through the interwar periods towards the Second World War. And of course, we refer to that period now as between the wars, but of course, for them, it wasn't between the wars. They had the Great War behind them. They were now looking forward to a much more hopeful future. But we as readers, we know what's coming, and everything is sort of tempered by that. There's a few hints as we move into the 30s about what, like, the third book concerns itself very much with rising fascism and anti-Semitism in the UK, particularly in Glasgow, we see the seeds being sown of what's going to be coming and what are the challenges that are going to be faced as we move forward. So I have an idea, but the actual detail of a lot of it will probably depend on people's interest and how much people want to. I'll keep writing them as long as people want to read them.
Well, I mean, winning the debut prize must be helping get people reading them.
I think it certainly gives me a lot more readers, and there's been a lot more interest. And I mean, I obviously wouldn't be speaking to people tonight on this interview if it hadn't been for that. So I'm very grateful for the exposure and the fuss that it's caused. Because it does, as I think you suggested to Chris, that it's a very crowded market, the Scottish crime scene. I mean, there's so much talent on display at Bloody Scotland every year, and you just have to walk into any bookshop and you're just confronted with a wall of excellent crime fiction. So how do you get to raise your head slightly above that parapet and say, please read mine, and something like a prize like the debut prize helps that, because it does, for good or for bad, it points something and saying this one we liked, so you might want to try it.
Chris answered this without me asking him it, but what have you read recently and enjoyed? Someone's asked you here who your favourite author is.
The simple answer is that I don't, and again, you shouldn't say this probably in this sort of setting, I don't read a huge amount of crime fiction. I've read quite a lot of the kind of classic ones, but I'm not an avid crime reader. I read an awful lot of non-fiction. I read a lot of, partly for research and partly for enjoyment. I read a lot of very much character-led fiction, which is, I think, perhaps what comes out here, that I'm interested in characters primarily, and if something actually happens to those characters, if there's actually a story, then that's a bonus. But the character is first and foremost. The thing I've read just recently, I was reading partly for research, which was a piece of non-fiction, which was The Five by Hallie Rubenhall, which is, I think, people will be familiar with. It's about a retelling of or an investigation into the lives of the five main, or the canonical five victims of Jack the Ripper in the 1880s, trying to resurrect their reputations, really, and show that that probably our whole approach to them is completely flawed. And I was interested in that because part of one of the books I'm looking at, thinking of, is actually going back to a Victorian period. Not necessarily that story, but just to investigate that, because there was a lot of very much primary sources used there. And when it comes to historical research, you've got to go to the people who actually were there and wrote about it, who lived it, who knew what that period smelt like and sounded like and tasted like, so that you can actually see it. You can't just read what people today are saying about it. You've actually got to get the horse's mouth. And there was a lot of material in that book that was original, which is very good. So as for favourite authors, I always find that a very hard question to answer, because it depends what day of the week it is. I love Margaret Atwood. I love Julian Barnes. I love, but I also love Thomas Hardy and Jane Austen. And so they're all coming to my celestial dinner party, I think. Yeah.
Good choices. I'm a big fan of Margaret Atwood.
Oh, she's brilliant.
And Thomas Hardy, yeah. And Jane Austen.
Yeah. And Margaret Atwood's first book was self-published.
Oh, there you go. I did not know that.
Yeah. So you go. So you never know. I'm not suggesting for a moment that I'm Margaret Atwood, but it's there's quite a lot of self-publishing has been around a long time in various ways. It's obviously become much easier because of the technology, but it's easy. It's still easy, very, very easy to dismiss it as a kind of vanity project or whatever, or you only did that because nobody wanted it and nobody it wasn't good enough for anything else. But the whole of the publishing world is quite complex and quite fickle, and of course it's ruled by fashions and fads and whatever. And I think there's a lot of very, very good books that slip through the cracks, and in other circumstances would actually be very, very successful. I remember reading an interview with someone who was a someone who was, I think, I don't know quite what their job title was, but their idea was to look for trends in literature and publishing. And they were saying that what they do is they always look at self-published books, because they're the ones that are taking bigger chances, because generally a lot of traditional publishing is quite conservative. They don't like to take risks and things because it's a commercial activity, but individual authors can take risks, and you often get quite interesting new developments in the self-published world. It's somewhere you should look.
I don't disagree. I mean, to be honest, I think as a book group, we have a lot of people who self-publish or are with very small presses in the group, and often their books are equally as enjoyable as something you will go and buy at the supermarket.
Yeah.
There's no, the quality is comparable.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There's some astounding self-published.
Yeah, exactly.
Out there.
And it's just the opportunity to traditionally publish it has not come along for whatever reason. There's just so many books potentially laid in front of publishers. They can only pick a certain amount. And there's also probably a slight aversion to looking at something very, very different, because they're taking a commercial risk on it, and they can't do that very easily.
So Patsy, who's watching, says she's got she loved the first two books and has a third.
Oh, good. Well, that's lovely to hear. And I'm hoping that people, if they do read the first one, they will be sufficiently engaged with the character to want to know what happens next and where this person's going, to see him developing. He does change within the first book. I wanted someone who, at the beginning, he comes across as somewhat gruff, somewhat arrogant. But we also see behind the scenes that he really isn't as strong as he's appearing. He is damaged, and we see him slowly developing throughout the book, and that continues in the second and the third and onwards. And I want to see him developing both his relationships and his approach to pathology and his working relationships with the police.
Well, I'd imagine at the time that we're talking about, there's going to be some quite big scientific changes as well.
Absolutely, yes. So, and these are kind of mapped out, and we know exactly when these happen, and we know what impact they might have, and there's all sorts of opportunities to place him at the centre of these things. So, he's likely to know some of these people, given the circles he works in. How will that impact upon certain cases that he's working on, and so on. So yeah, so watch this space.
Exciting, although he's a long way off DNA, isn't he?
Oh yes, yeah, he's. I'm afraid he's going to be a very old man before DNA comes around.
Yeah. Is that part of the fun of writing, though, back in like a more historical one? Because like I would imagine with the modern technology, it is a lot easier.
Oh yeah, that's the problem. It's too easy. One of the big challenges in this book is that they discover these bodies and they don't know who they are. Nowadays that doesn't take you that long to find out who somebody is by doing, they've got dental records, they've got DNA samples very quickly, and if you're on a database, they'll find you very fast. But if you don't have any of that, then you have to go rather old school. You have to try and work out exactly what can we glean from this body, even to work out, the sex, the age of the body, what kind of distinguishing marks has it got, what old injuries are there, so that we can start mapping this against known missing persons. And that's the way they had to do it in the past, and it's much more meticulous, but it's also, I think, much more interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, so that was part of the joy of it, and I really also wanted to write a book that didn't have mobile phones in it. So that was one of the main things as well, because I wanted a world where there were no mobile phones. That would be good.
That comes up a lot for people who choose to do historical crimes. No mobile phones, no CCTV.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so I wanted to, he faces the same challenges that if these cases were so looked at today, it would still be a challenge, but they would be nothing like the challenge that he has faced to try and work it out.
So you've got a minute left. apart from, there's quite a few people here who have the first book to read, but
Oh, good,
for
good.
those who are watching who don't, remind them what they're going to go off and buy.
Well, it's called The Silent House of Sleep, and it's the first in the Dr. Jack Cuthbert mystery series. And you will meet Dr. Jack Cuthbert, a Scottish pathologist working with Scotland Yard in London between the wars, and he solves in this book one of his most baffling forensic cases. And if you read this, hopefully you will want to know more and read in the other ones too.
And lovely bloody Scotland badge on the front.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's one of the conditions of winning. You've got to have it on your cover. There you go.
And then all that's left to say is, well, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
On your win.
And as I said, my overwhelming feeling about it is just gratitude. That it's been a wonderful opportunity to meet people, to talk on things like this, to share the book with people, and hopefully get a few more people who can meet this character. When you create a character and you put them out into the world, you do hope people will like them and enjoy them, and that seems to be what's happening. But the more the merrier.
Brilliant. And then thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. No, thank you for the opportunity.